All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Professor Adonai Quetzal. If you know me from we have people, please mute your mics and all. Just gonna go ahead and double check that real quick, make sure we're all good to go. All right, cool. All right, well, let's try that again. Hi, everyone. My name is Professor Adonai Quetzal. If you know me from Temple of the Conquering Child here in Denver, I also go by the name Tao Chikamisolchito. Yeah. So welcome to Enochian Magick 101. This is my second ever class for the Divination Academy, so I'm really excited. If you were with me last time, going over Ceremonial Magic 101, which we covered a lot in that one class. I am really glad you came back because that was a lot of fun, and now we get to dig into what we kind of started with on that particular one. So a couple of disclaimers before we get in, before we get really started. Again, my name is Adonai. My pronouns are they, them in English, or ella in Spanish. I am really glad to be here. But a couple disclaimers before we really get started. This is tonight's class is really a introduction, history, background. We aren't going to be talking about the elemental squares or the great tablet or what kind of material needs to be under each of the table legs, if you know what I'm talking about. This is going to be a lot of preliminary knowledge, background, context for where Enochian Magick would pop out of and how and why. So as we go through our next couple of classes, we will get into the actual magical practice. The way I kind of foresee this series going, being that this is the first of an Enochian Magick series, is that this one we're going to talk about, again, just as a concept, we're going to talk about the celestial alphabets and their history. So we're going to touch on Agrippa. We're going to touch on the Book of Enoch. Just sorry about that. Just because again, that does play, a role in the magical system in a way. And we're going to touch on a couple other things. So it's going to be a lot of broad strokes. It's going to be we're not going to be getting into the magical system tonight. And with that, Enochian Magick can be very, very practical. So if you're like, I want to practice Enochian Magick, you're not going to need most of what I'm going to give you tonight to be able to get right into practice. This is definitely for those of y'all who are interested in the history, who are interested in the background, who are interested in what John Dee and Edward Kelly, what they're kind of into beforehand, before they started contacting the angels and such. This is going to be a lot of that stuff. So just heads up on that. Says there's an echo that is making it hard to hear you, so please speak a bit lower. All right, I will speak a little slower. So the Norse mythology class was accidentally scheduled, double overlapped with this one on accident. So that one got changed to another day, but is still happening. But tonight we are doing Enochian or angelic magic of the Renaissance age. So that is what we're doing here. So just kind of address that. I'm glad the history sounds fun to some folks. All right, cool. So let's get into it. All right. So the way I'm going to kind of start is I'm going to give a broad overview of the Enochian Magick system, history, story, whatever you want to call it. And just to kind of give us an outline of what we're going to kind of follow. And a lot of what we're going to be doing here today is going to be like kind of the precursor to this. Um, so let's see here. So pretty much Enochian Magick is a system of, well, magic, founded by a astrologer and occultist named John Dee and the alchemist Edward Kelly during the reign of Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I. Their whole thing was that they wanted to contact the angels that informed Enoch from the Bible. Pretty much, Enoch was the last of the great patriarchs to make contact with these kind of divine beings. If you want to take, the biblical account into like, as truth. I guess another concept warning there for this class is being that we are dealing with angelic magic. There's going to be a lot of Abrahamic stuff coming up. A lot of Christian, Jewish, and Catholic stuff coming up. So just a heads up there. Enoch was the last of the big patriarchs to contact the angels, and John Dee was like, well, if they could do it, why hasn't anybody in modern times done this? And so he set out to do exactly that. He started off with a couple different scryers. None really worked out too well. And so he came in contact with a guy named Edward Kelly, who really kind of provided the missing thing that he needed. Kelly was an amazingly talented scryer, was able to do leaps and bounds, beyond the previous scryers he had been working with. And so they started scrying. It is said that Dee used a obsidian mirror. And he would essentially go around Europe doing these scrying sessions with Kelly and trying to contact these angels. And according to them, they succeeded. These angels would give Kelly, who was scrying them, and would be dictating to Dee what he was seeing, while Dee wrote everything down, put it all together. Kelly would dictate what he saw, what was going on, and the angels gave Dee a huge, gave Dee and Kelly a huge library of essentially lore, right, if you will. They were giving them messages and stories, passages, ethic ideas. They transferred an entire working language, an entire alphabet that has verbs and nouns, and syntax and conjunctions. Like it's a full working language. And so while this was going on, Dee was ecstatic, right? He was just, I want to learn more. I want to know more. Show me how to work this system that you're giving me. But they never actually gave him the keys to how to actually work the system itself, which is where things start getting a little interesting. The entire time while Dee was getting more and more into this, Kelly was incredibly suspicious of these angels. Kelly was not sure about them and their intentions. And he thought them perhaps malicious beings, actually not, good angels, like how we tend to think of angels, right? And so it all kind of came to a head after, they spent a good couple years gathering these tools, building these materials, these tablets and such, to where at one point, the angels told Kelly, and thus he told Dee, that to succeed in their magical pact with these angels, these two men needed to share each other's wives. There's a lot just to unpack in that one little thing, but it can essentially be boiled down to these two men were two halves of the same whole, and they need to share everything, including their wives, share their wives, their spouses, their partners. So, they were both married and good Christians in that sort of particular way. Yeah. After that, so Kelly was reluctant, obviously. Dee was like, I don't want to do this. Both of them were not happy about it. Gals were not happy about it. But Dee was like, well, we should do this because I want the keys to that knowledge. He's like, we've come this far. I'm not going to stop. And so they did. The record's, not fully clear whether it was like a one night stand kind of thing or multiple times. But side note: 9 months after the wife swapping, one of John Dee's kids was born that looked a little not like him. So there is that. Their friendship started to crumble at this point. Kelly would go on to be an alchemist for one of the continental kings, trying to make gold. And Dee went back to England, his library ransacked, and essentially kind of kept selling things off until the day he died. And from there, Enochian Magick, the two guys who were doing it obviously kind of took a lull, right? Dee's manuscripts were lost, some were hidden. And there wasn't really much left of what was had. One of the main documents that was kept pretty much only had like the first half of the experiments, not the second half. And so that first chunk, which is what would make up the true magical treaty, if I'm getting that title correct off the top of my head, a true telling, a true relation. Right? I, for some reason, didn't write that particular one down in my notes. But that one would be the main document that, main collection of documents that the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn would use. And they would be the main ones carrying Enochian Magick into the 20th and 21st century, 20th century. The Golden Dawn, for those of you who are not familiar, because it does bear repeating as far as the story of the Enochian Magick is concerned, the Golden Dawn were a quasi-Masonic offshoot, a group of guys who pretty much got the rights to be able to do a bunch of this like weird Masonic kind of stuff, but also they found these documents called the Z documents that had a whole bunch of other things that are not necessarily in Freemasonry, but Freemasonry definitely plays from the good. 5 Books of Mystery and Liber Lo Death. Yeah, those are the modern names. I forget the one I was particularly thinking of. Thank you, Paul, for that. So the Z ciphers and all that, and they would build this magical order around this. The guys responsible for doing this was mostly a guy named McGregor Mathers, Samuel McGregor Mathers, and a couple others, and they pretty much built an entire magical system around these Z cipher documents, right? The Enochian Magick was a part of that. It was a good chunk of it. Yeah, Kabbalah played a role in it. It followed definitely in like the Hermetic and the Hermetic vein as well. And the Golden Dawn would essentially be one of the most important magical schools in history. If y'all are familiar, if you're here, I have a feeling you're familiar with the Rider-Waite tarot, right? The classic one, or as I think we're now trying to call it Rider-Waite Smith, because Pamela Coleman Smith, the artist, her name continuously gets dropped from it because she was a brown queer woman in the early 1900s. Why do they want to be associated with her? So they just wrote her off. So yeah, Rider-Waite Smith. So that tarot, Both Arthur Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith were members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The Irish poet W.B. Yeats was a member, as well as the infamous occultist Aleister Crowley. And so it really played a big role. I mean, Israel Regardie was also another member, and he was Crowley's secretary for a while. And his books, being that he was an occultist, but he was also Jewish in heritage, ethnicity. His books on Kabbalah and Kabbalah, which we'll get to the difference between those two in a minute, are some of the only ones that you really see recommended in occult circles, as well as like actual like Jewish Kabbalah circles as well. And then also Dion Fortune, who really helped popularize the whole like Avalon, King Arthur type style stuff. Her writings, if you've ever seen that book Moon Magic, with like the blue cover with the little moon on it, her writings were really responsible for moving forward a lot of the modern goddess movement outside of Wicca. So, and all these folks came out of the Golden Dawn from at one point or another. And so it really can't, stretch how important the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was. And so what they did to do, because they had an incomplete system, was piece it together pretty much. They, Dee was never fully given how to work the system himself. So now the Golden Dawn had an incomplete of an incomplete, essentially, right? And they had to structure it the best they can, the best they could. Most of what they had, if you're familiar with Enochian Magick, this will make a little more sense to you. Obviously, we're going to go over a lot of this later. Excuse me. What the Golden Dawn had mostly had to do with like the watchtowers, the elemental tablets, those sorts of things. Less the rest. And after the Golden Dawn, it's Enochian Magick's influence continued to spread mostly outside of the Golden Dawn sphere through Aleister Crowley. Crowley's system of magic called Thelema, who's saying this maxim, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law, love is the law, love under will. A lot of his theology and his, for lack of a better term, his pantheon comes out of scrying the Enochian aethers, the Enochian airs, otherwise like different Enochian keys, different levels of Enochian sphere, if you will. Came out of him scrying those with during a series of sex magic rituals with a guy named Victor Benjamin Newberg in the deserts of Mexico and Africa. And Crowley being as infamous or famous, however you kind of ascribe him to that, kind of helped keep pushing Enochian a little more forward while things were still lost, right? And the Golden Dawn had broken up by that point, carrying off in different minor fractions, which is how Regardie and Dion Fortune would find it. But that's most of Crowley's works were done. His visions on it were recorded in Liber 418, a vision of the voice, which we'll talk about in just a little bit in a little bit as well. And it's from really Crowley that you start getting even the more avant-garde, if you will. If you were ever that edgelord at 16 who was like, I'm going to read the Satanic Bible, and because Anton LaVey, right, all that, edgy stuff. And then, like, at the end, if you notice, of the Satanic Bible, he's got the Enochian keys, right? And so that's where a lot of like the left-hand path stuff starts getting Enochian magic is from LaVey's Bible. And so then you start getting these left-hand path ideas of working with Enochian angels and such, something that you had never really seen before. Because even if, Crowley was calling himself the Great Beast 666, which, fun fact, his mother deemed him that when he was a child, so he kind of reclaimed it, and he didn't actually bestow that upon himself. they started getting into like, these different currents and these different weird offshoots of things. But it wasn't until um, the last like 30 years or so, if not a little less, or maybe a little more, we found the other documents. We found the rest of the stuff, and they started actually coming into play because they were found, but they just weren't really usable yet. They weren't transcribed. They weren't print in a mass market kind of way. But they really started coming into the general occult world. And so now is where you get the age of Dee purists, John Dee purists, essentially, right? Who have all of Dee's diaries, who have all of his notes. And these are the people who are like, don't read Golden Dawn material, don't read, Enochian Magic for beginners type thing. They're the kinds that are like, read John Dee's work and that's it. And go for it. And that system is very, very different than the Golden Dawn Enochian Magic as well, which is obviously different than the way like Thelema and Crowley use it, which is different than the Left Hand Path. But even the Thelemic and the Left Hand Path variations and so forth would still have more in common with the Golden Dawn version than they do with the Dee purists. And so it really started getting like pushing forward. Authors like editors like Stephen Skinner and such have been really pushing those a lot forward. There's another author, I forget his name off the top of my head, who's been doing a lot of those. But yeah, I mean, if you're here in Denver, where Academy is technically based, Goddess Isis Books has them. Like you can get Dee's diaries on Amazon. Like they're not that hard to find anymore. And with that, with like, Dee's diaries coming more into play, and Thelema having an influence, the Golden Dawn style taking on its own weird, fun routes, like what you can play Enochian chess now. You can use the Enochian tablets to play chess and use chess for divination, which is just kind of awesome. You have other weird, fun, like influences, things coming in. Like, one of the number one witchcraft writers right now, Gabriela Herstick, who is of Mexican and Jewish descent. She just released about 2 years ago, a year ago, Sacred Sex, which is an amazing book on sex magic, as well as Between the Elements, which is a great book on elemental magic. And she's got a couple others. Like, she's pulling from, well, she may not be using Enochian magic. She is a Babylon devotee. And so Babylon is a goddess that comes out of the Thelemic pantheon, so that's Crowley, but is also known under the name the Daughter of Fortitude in the Enochian system. Right? And she is, Gabriela Herstick. If one of y'all might be awesome just typing it in there for me, because my thing's on a tripod. What's up there? She's awesome. She is working out. That's like I she's very active on social media, so she did like one of those, ask me anything type things on Instagram. And thank you for writing that name in there, y'all. She did one of those ask me anythings on Instagram. And I was like, so with all the Babylon stuff you talk about, this Thelemic goddess, this who's commonly referred to as the sacred whore, the mother of abominations, right? Or thus the daughter of fortitude. If you've ever worked with the Thoth tarot, that's the lust card, right? The woman riding the beast that's been swapped out for strength. I asked her, I was like, are you, with all this Babylon working stuff and all this, how much she brings her into her magical and her witchcraft actively, because, Golden Dawn, Enochian, Thelema, all this is very ceremonial or high magic. I was like, are you into Thelema? Are you, what are your thoughts on Crowley? And she was just like, I don't mess with Crowley. I'm into Babylon, and that's like my jam. And there are a lot of people kind of taking this goddess that comes from the Thelemic system out of from the Enochian magical scrying, right? Scrying, and working with her in a totally different way than I think Crowley or Dee would have ever imagined. And at this point, they're starting to permeate. I mean, those are, again, some of y'all mentioned y'all got those books. They're starting to permeate into the greater witchcraft world. And so Enochian magic, whether we recognize it or not, is still very much present. So that's why I'm really excited to kind of do this series of classes. And the other influence that I kind of forgot to mention is Wicca. If you've ever done like a traditional Wiccan invocation or circle, I call upon the watchtowers of the north, I call upon the watchtowers of the south, right? That, like, you're casting your circle. The tradition of calling on the watchtowers comes from particularly Alexandrian witchcraft, Alexandrian Wicca, right? Alex and Maxine Saunders, who took Gardner's Wicca, that Gardner based a lot of it on, Crowley and Thelema as well. Gardner's star goddess is just Crowley's new just a thing. You can't tell I'm a Thelemite, so I have a lot of random Crowley Thelema backs. My apologies. He was problematic, but I like the system. Alex and Maxine Saunders re-added in a lot of high magic to Wicca. Like, if you ever like looked at like a Buckland or a Cunningham, or even a Doreen Valiente Wicca book, and then looked at the Witch's Bible by the Farrars, right? Stuart and Janet Farrar, and it's like, what is all these circles and this and that and these weird languages? That's the difference. Literally, it's right there. It's Alexandrian, put in a bunch of high magic, particularly Solomonic and Enochian magic. And so the concept of calling over the watchtowers is literally referencing the watchtowers in Enochian magic, which, just since I'm addressing them, I mentioned them a couple of times. The watchtowers are considered the four pillars that are holding up the great table, which is essentially heaven in the universe. But yeah, so it's that's what they're calling them. They're considered to be like gates, right, for elemental energies, spirits, and such, to be able to pass through to us, while we can also pass through to them. In Enochian magic, it's said the watchtowers hold up the great table. Everything's tables in Enochian magic. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I like it. Kind of square. But yeah. So if you've ever done anything like that, whether you knew it or not, you're utilizing Enochian stuff. So with all that out of the way, I'm like, how long have I been already just info dumping? All right, it's been a while already. Cool. Yay. We haven't even got started. Let's get into some of this. Let's get into some of the origins of this stuff, because I'm a history buff. I like this stuff. This is fun to me. So let's start with the name first off, right? Enochian magic. We call it Enochian magic because it's named after the angel Enoch. Like I mentioned, he was the last great patriarch that got the wisdom from the divine, right? From God, from the angels. And so that's what we call it now, Enochian magic. Enochian, right? John Dee and Edward Kelly never referred to it that way. They did not ever call their system angelic or Enochian magic. They would refer to it as angelic magic, sometimes celestial magic. And so with that kind of gives us some clues as to where we could start when we want to dig into, like, where did this kind of come from? Because, Dee was trying to contact these angels. Clearly, they gave him this whole system on how to talk to them, how to use their language, how to, invoke them. But how did he do it in the first place? Right? Like, no one ever talks about that. Like, he had to make contact, for the first time at one point. So he had to have some preliminary knowledge. So what could that have looked like is kind of my question. Some of what I'm about to talk about right now, if you watch Dr. Justin Sledge on Esoterica, his video on Enochian magic and Enochian language, it's kind of what got me thinking about this and gave me some of my sources. I'm never one to tout that I know everything, so go watch his stuff. His channel's amazing. His humor is dry and hilarious. I love it. Not everybody's sense of humor, but he's amazing. So Sledge points us to that probably one of the first places to start looking is Agrippa, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, right? The 3 books of occult philosophy, that famous tome. If you ever get a chance, get your hands on a copy. Get your hands on a copy. There's 3 editions out now. There's the old school Donald Tyson one. Cheap, good. As far as modern scholarship goes, it is missing. It is really, really missing. I don't necessarily recommend that one per se. Eric Purdue has released a new, for the first time, translated in over some odd hundreds of years, edition of 3 books that'll generally run you about $200 instead of Tyson's $700. Eric Purdue, Purdue or Perdue. I forget exactly off the top of my head. I don't have a copy of his ones because, like I just said, they run you about $200. Getting there. His is the definitive version, and as far as I'm concerned, as a book collector, his just the binding and everything is amazing quality, but he translated it straight from the original from the original manuscripts, whereas a lot of the other ones that are around, translated from the translations from the translation, right? And so his fantastic. He also keeps Agrippa's original hand drawings of all the diagrams and everything, whereas I believe Tyson's ones are computerized or regenerated. So that's just kind of cool. Then there's another version. I forget who it's by or who the publisher is. But it's like these 3 little ones, like they're like almost like mass market paperback size. And they're actively translated into, for lack of a better term, the layman's language, right? They're not trying to be they're not trying to be overly technical. They're not transliterating it. They're not, well, Agrippa said, for example, A plus B equals C, A plus B plus C equals, D. They just kind of go, well, A equals D, because that's where we eventually get, right? Just for lack of a better example, that was really probably a shoddy one. Anyways, they really kind of just streamline the language. They get rid of a lot of the fluff. That's especially in the more old school dialects and writing styles. And so it's a lot more readable. These versions of Agrippa's books. It's a lot more just easily legible. So I definitely do recommend those as well. Those ones are also a little on the higher price point. YouTube, the guy's channel is called Foolish Fish. Foolish, as in like the Fool Card Zero, right? Foolish Fish. He has a video where he dissects all 3 editions, and he's like, we'll show you line for line what I'm talking about. Like, he'll show you a passage in Tyson's versus a passage in Purdue's versus a passage in this other one. And so you can kind of see, and he goes over like all the binding and all just that stuff about it. His channel, also amazing stuff. But yeah, so if you're looking for Agrippa, those are the 3 editions out there. But we know for a fact that Dee was familiar with Agrippa's work. You really couldn't have been a Renaissance magician without being familiar with Agrippa's work, right? Like nowadays, there's thousands of books on magic and the occult and this and that. Back in the day, though, not so much. Generally try to kill you or burn your books, or both. Generally both. so he's definitely familiar with Agrippa's books. Like, I believe they were actively like they were in his library. He had one of the largest libraries on the continent, or in Europe in general, not just the continent. Um, and in Agrippa's three books of occult philosophy, he mentions three different what is sometimes just commonly referred to as celestial alphabets. Uh, of those three, blah, 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 words. He mentions three celestial alphabets. Those three are one, which is generally referred to as just the celestial alphabet. This one was most likely created by Agrippa. It combined Hebrew and Greek languages. There were 22 letters in this alphabet that corresponded to different constellations in the night sky. According to the Kabbalah and according to Agrippa, the Kabbalah says that each of the traditional Hebrew letters can be found amongst the stars, and each constellation, each of these, Hebrew letters is a living angel. And so it's pretty much said that like this celestial alphabet, you can look in the night sky and you can see the shapes and letters, like you can see the alphabet right in the sky. Later occultists, later scholars would say that Agrippa received this alphabet from God. Do what thou wilt with how you believe on that one or not. But yeah, that one is probably one of the more famous of the three celestial alphabets. Its lettering is probably most similar to the Enochian alphabet. I don't have a picture of the other three because planning a class during these 7 or 8 retrogrades, we're now at 8, has been a lot of fun. So a PowerPoint I do not have, but yeah, so that is the Enochian alphabet, and so this is probably most closely resembles the celestial alphabet from Agrippa, which, just for context, was written around 1510, but was published in 1533. Let's see, we got a question here. I will explain the difference between Kabbalah and Kabbalah in a little bit, but yes, I am definitely getting to that. Short answer: Kabbalah, Jewish; Kabbalah, occultist. No need to apologize. But yeah, if you see it with a C, it's Christian, and generally, Kabbalah spelled with a C, it's Christian. Generally, very, very, very anti-Semitic. Yeah, just me. Kabbalah, Jewish; Kabbalah with a Q, is a cult, for lack of a better term. So yeah, so celestial alphabets. There's the celestial alphabet, based again on the stars. Then there is the transitus fluvi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. My Latin is non-existent. I've been trying to learn Hebrew, not Latin. According to Agrippa, again, this is one of the three. According to Agrippa, this is one of the 3 magical writing systems of the Hebrews. It is said that Hebrew was given to Moses, Enochian to Enoch, and the Transius Fluvi to Abraham. So that's, where that kind of comes from. The Enochian alphabet is similar to the Tree of Life in Kabbalah. Yes, it is. There's even maps to back that up, which is why we're going to talk about a little bit about Kabbalah later on. And we're also going to have a whole class on Kabbalah at some point. Kabbalah, as much as I, as somebody who is not Jewish, can talk on Kabbalah, I mostly be talking about how it's historically been made open, and what is Kabbalah with a Q. I don't have a diagram here in front of me, but it also was opened up in Spain, which is where part of my ancestors come from as well. So we're gonna talk at least a little bit about it at some point. But yeah. So the transitus fluvi, which essentially translates to passage through the river, is what that phrase means. And is thought to reference when the Jewish people crossed the Euphrates River upon their return from Babylon to Jerusalem. Fun little fact about this particular one: the transitus maybe is the alphabet that is used in the Blair Witch Project movies. Everyone thinks they're runes, but I feel like we're witches, we're occultists, magicians, whatever we want to call ourselves. We could probably recognize that those weren't runes. They might have been runic looking, with a descriptor. But yeah, no, they are this celestial alphabet that is first really documented by Agrippa. Whether this existed pre-Agrippa or not is kind of that is still being researched as far as I'm concerned. Correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, though. Call me on that shit. Stuff tonight? I don't know. But yeah, the apparently the director, when I was doing my research, I found this. Apparently the director of the Blair Witch Project was like, they wanted to do runes, but figured everyone and their mom is using runes. So they wanted to find something else. And he had Nigel Pennick's Magical Alphabets book and stumbled upon this one. I was like, all right, we'll use that. That sounds cool. And it was just different and weird, according to them. He uses the word he wanted to exploit this alphabet. I don't know. That sentence made me uncomfortable, but it was the 90s. Whatever. But the little stickman dude, that is definitely that was a fine name that was used. So I guess he used a bit of both. But yeah, so that's the 2 out of the 3. The third one was called the Malachim. Malachim, really, the CHI. Malachim. It is a plural of the Hebrew word malachim. I'm still working on Hebrew. And essentially means angels or messengers. It's a plural of the Hebrew word for angel. This alphabet is derived once again from Hebrew and Greek, most likely created by Agrippa himself. But this one, it wasn't a director who used it, but it is used by some Freemasons to a limited extent. That was a key phrase. Limited extent is what I kept finding. They would not give any more, which makes me think it's something outside of the Blue Lodge degrees, which are the standard degrees, your basic ones. So those are those 3 alphabets. And if I had pictures, I'd love to show them to you. Definitely recommend looking these up. They, again, all fairly similar. Whereas the celestial one is obviously based on the shapes of the constellations, and the latter 2 were based on Hebrew and Greek letters, and thus Hebrew and Greek letter formation. The Enochian magic, the Enochian language, or as Dee would call it, the angelic language or the celestial language, does have more in common with English. It really does. It doesn't have actually much ties to Hebrew. So, point 1 for that, it was made up by Kelly in that particular bit. And so, yeah, we know Dee was associated with New and had read, was familiar with Agrippa's 3 books, and so he was familiar with these languages and these alphabet systems, and their lettering style. Whether how much of that influenced him or not, we can't really say, especially being that Kelly was the one receiving these letters via his scrying. It was said that Kelly stated that upon receiving the alphabet, there was essentially like a magical, like a diagram essentially in it, like a square, a grid. There we go, words. He would see in front of him, and the letters would appear in the grid, and he would essentially be describing it to Dee, who would then be writing it down and actually putting it in pen to paper. And as we'll talk a little more later, Kelly was a forger and a counterfeiter and another schemer in many other ways. So a lot of folks have questions about his validity of seeing these things. But then you have the point of it's an entire working system, entire working language. To do that, to create an entire language out of thin air, you have to That would take a task, and most people don't deem Kelly as that type of person. So now we're gonna, yeah, that is kind of a big deal. We're kind of definitely jumbling into some territory there. This is the kind of place where, like, this whole validity of the alphabet and the language itself is where I start jumping into suspension of disbelief. The way I like to phrase it, is it more fun to believe that Kelly was actually getting these things and that these things actually work? I don't know. To me, that's more fun. So that's why I'm going to go for it. If it works, it works. In ceremonial magic, specifically in Thelema, we like to say we handle our magic the method of science in religion. We try to document our things. We test our things like scientific experiments. So if you do that, try it. Just if you do the same invocation at the same time with the same plants in the same place, and you get the same results at a certain point, you kind of, right? But yeah, it's more fun. So outside of Agrippa and bearing the name of the system of magic, we get to Enoch the prophet, right? Who also does play a role in this system. Again, you don't need to read the books or the Book of Enoch books. You don't need to be well versed in biblical lore to be able to work the Enochian system, but it bears his name, so I kind of feel like I should at least know something. And if Dee wanted to essentially, we know that Dee wrote down that he wanted to contact the angels of Enoch. What did Enoch get then? Why was that so important? So this is why we're covering this here. I just need some more coffee of this. Before we get into that bit, does anybody have any other questions regarding or comments regarding the celestial languages? I'm like, does this thing show me if people are typing? I don't know. So we're gonna continue on. So Enoch, right? Enoch is the only patriarch, the only biblical patriarch to have never be given a death date. If you've ever been forced or chose to read the Bible, and as you're working your way through Genesis, and it's just that long, fracking, dry list of so-and-so was born of so-and-so and then died, and gave birth to so-and-so and then died of so-and-so. That bit, right? Notice Enoch, not given death dates. He was a biblical patriarch who lived prior to Noah's flood. He was actually Noah's great grandfather, said to be. Context. I'm just putting this out here now. I should have done this earlier. For the sake of this lecture, I'm just going to be speaking these things of Enoch was the father or grandfather of Noah. I'm not going to be like, if you believe that, da da da. We're just going to go with, we're buying into the system for the sake of just streamlining things. You say amen, I say Nima. So he was seventh generation down from Adam and Eve. He was father to Methuselah, who was again the grandfather of Noah. His son was the one who pretty much wrote down the scribe for the Book of Enoch, according to legend, for this particular bit. While Enoch himself dictated the text, is how the legend goes, right? According to the books of Enoch, there's 3 books. Enoch was taken into heaven, came back down for 30 days, and that's when he did this, dictation, and then he went back up. According to biblical lore, we really only have backing for 1 ascension. And that comes in Genesis 5, verse 24. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That does not say that he died. And that's kind of important for a lot of what we're about to get into too. Especially once we get later into the whys of Enochian magic. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. According to 3 Enoch, so the way they're broken up is what we generally call the Book of Enoch is referred to by most scholars as 1 Enoch, then there's 2 Enoch, and then 3 Enoch, all from various different time periods with most likely, clearly, different writers, all trying to, it's if you're familiar with the Corpus Hermeticum, or even like the Kabbalistic documents, writing under a supposed name is pretty standard for occult stuff. So according to 3 Enoch and some Kabbalistic literature, Enoch was taken to heaven and was given realm over all celestial creatures. He became chief of the archangels and was taught all the secret mysteries of heaven. He also executes all commands of God, leaving some to have identified him with the angel of Metatron. If you're not familiar with Metatron, Metatron is the angel that is said to, if God speaks it, if God speaks it, Metatron is the one who does the creating, right? If you've been into any of the New Agey stuff recently, the Merkabahs, those, like essentially like they look like a D20 but like pointy, right? At the crystal stores, at the metaphysical shops. The Merkabah comes from the Hebrew word Merkava, which translates to chariot, which has a whole tie to, again, Hebrew mysticism. Merkava mysticism predates Kabbalah, and has ties to just the whole Metatron thing. Are the 3 books of Enoch in the Bible? No. So these are all considered, what is the word? Words. They're all part of an apocrypha. Apocrypha. I cannot word today. Mercury in retrograde. Apocrypha, which essentially means they are not canon. They were actively removed, left out, denied, rejected, whatever you want to call it, entry into the Bible, as well into the Christian Bible, as well as the Hebrew Bible, what in the Western world a lot of folks call the Old Testament. They were actively left out of both Bibles by both traditions, but does pop up in Ethiopian Christianity. Yes, they were essentially banned, much like a lot of which essentially would kind of make them similar to like the Gnostic texts of like the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the Nag Hammadi Library, very similar in vein to those sorts of things. Yeah, but we all know the Catholic Church has them. Probably. I mean, we know the Ethiopian Church had it. For sure. Like, the Ethiopian Church was like that's part of the whole thing. Like, Enoch is amazing to them. And I believe one of, like, the Eastern Orthodox, one of the Eastern churches, like Russian, like, Eastern Bloc, East, not, like, Asia East, also kind of considers them partially canon, or at least some of them canon. As far as where you can find all 3 books, they're all available online. They're very much public domain. I don't know off the top of my head which published edition would have all 3. I've been trying to find that. My old roommate was the Enochian magician personally. I'm personally more of a Kabbalist, Thelomite. Right? What? Catholicism stole from another religion? Unheard of. Seriously, who would have ever thunk? Yeah, they're out there. Probably you can find it on sacredtext.com or hermetic.com. If they're not on there, I'd be very surprised. They're most likely on hermetic.com or sacredtext.org, whatever it is. Right? So let's talk about 1 Enoch first. Let's get into this. Because 1 Enoch, that's where all the fun, weird stuff happens. Like, this is, again, it's an apocrypha, right? It's banned. We're reading banned books, right? Isn't it banned book month again? Right. So let's read some banned books. Let's read the Book of Enoch and talk about it. It's the Book of Enoch, an apocrypha in 3 parts, although commonly only one Enoch is considered the Book of Enoch, like I mentioned. One Enoch was originally written in Hebrew or Aramaic, another Semitic language, but the only surviving complete text was written in Ge'ez, G-E, apostrophe E-Z, which is an Ethiopian language. So again, like the only surviving complete text comes from Ethiopia, right? If you know your biblical lore, that's the land of like, Queen Sheba, who's, into Solomon perhaps, and Solomon built the temple using demons. Like, yeah, like, right, we're in this territory now. It's getting fun. So no Hebrew version still exists, but there are fragments of the Aramaic versions that were found with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And again, while not canon in the New or Old Testaments, several of while canon in the biblical or Talmudic texts, the authors of these texts show familiarity with it. They reference the Book of Enoch in the Bible and in the Hebrew Bible. They reference the events and the things talked about here, right? If it's not canon, but you're referencing, come on, tell us at least the rest. What are we missing, right? So what are we missing? What does the book have? What does one Enoch actually have in it? So one Enoch is broken up into 5 parts. Part 1 is called the Book of the Watchers. So again, the Watchers, watchtowers, right? We're starting to get there. This details the fall of the Watchers, were the angels who fathered the Nephilim, the giants, the offspring of the angels, and seducing human women and all that fun, not okay or polite stuff. So it details their fall. The hot ones, yes. Azazel, yes. Azazel is where Azazel is where he comes into play, I believe. I don't know if he comes in much before, but I believe absolutely is in the Book of Enoch. Yep. So it's detailing their fall, as well as the teachings of these celestial beings, right? Apparently, these angels also had a code of ethics that that is getting detailed in here as well. Very, very. I need to get my hands on a copy of this because I haven't read it in a while. And ethics of those angels, that's got to be questionable. Book 2, it's called the Book of Parables. It builds on the first Book of Enoch, and is believed by many scholars to be essentially a later edition. It's generally believed it was a Jewish Christian who wrote this. Who wrote the Book 2 of Enoch 1, 1 Enoch, to essentially add a more Christianized background concept to Enoch, to the Book of Enoch and all. They were giving advice to the British Empire. Yeah, they legit were. Fun note on that one for y'all, why that comment is actually quite. John Dee was the guy, founder of Enochian Magick, was the guy to coin the term the British Empire, and did a lot of the first British sailing maps, and advocated heavily for colonization. Okay, yeah. Anyways, yeah. So the Book of Parables, pretty much. Oh yeah, total stand-up guy, or lie down with your wife kind of guy. Yes, that's probably more apt. Book of Parables, getting a lot more Christian context into the Book of Enoch, make it less Jewish. Book 3 is generally referred to as the astronomical book. It offers a solar calendar based on a 364-day long year that always began on Wednesday, which is the fourth day of creation, in the creation myth in the Old Testament. Because on the fourth day is when God created light and time and days, right? So that's why. It is also said to give descriptions of the planets and the heavens. So give a description of the heavenly bodies, the planets, how they move, the stars, what their powers and generally what they were good for, right? And the heavens, so like how the different levels of heaven kind of come into play. According to the Book of Enoch, there's 10 levels of heaven. You get Enoch 3. Enoch is when you start getting into that, but yeah. Book number 4 is called the Book of Dream Visions. This is where it is said Enoch is given a vision of the history of Israel to come. Scholars pretty much have found that a lot of the visions pretty much lead up and end at the Maccabean revolt. So that's pretty much, they don't go past that as far as if you read this and you're like, why does it stop there? It's just kind of generally where the visions stop. The Book of Visions at a certain point also uses animals to represent humans and then uses humans to represent animals. And so it's Book of Visions. It's just kind of, it's kind of like a little bit of a dreamland, right? Then Book 5, the last book of 1 Enoch, is the Epistle of Enoch. This is pretty much almost a summary of all previous books. Lots of heavy-handed thesis statements. It pretty much is just, it's reaching the word count for your essay you're going to turn, essentially. It pretty much takes everything and just like reiterates it, re-puts it together, adds some context, but doesn't really offer much. And again, these ones particularly were all written by various different authors across various different periods of time. They were only at a certain point collected and then put together and seen as one Enoch, right? So that legend, that idea that Enoch, dictated this to his son, the historical record does not keep that up. The first 2 parts of 1 Enoch, for who was asking, was the Book of the Watchers, which was about the fall of the Watchers, who were the fathers of the Nephilim, and then the Book of Parables, which is essentially a Jewish Christian came in and was essentially trying to add Christian context to the first book, to 1 Enoch 1, for lack of a better term. 1 Enoch 2 was just rephrasing 1 Enoch 1 to give it more of a Christian context, if that helps. Right? So those are the 5 books of 1 Enoch. That is the most common, what you hear of Enoch. Levels to heaven intriguing. Yeah, according to this, 10 levels. Your thoughts on Enoch 1:4 has no chemical reference. Enoch 2 Enoch. I'm glad somebody picked up on that alchemical thing. Sorry, that made me smile. 2 Enoch, the only edition to survive in its entirety is written in Old Church Slavonic, so Slavic language, and is dated to the 1st century AD. This 2 Enoch tells of Enoch's travels through the 10 heavens of Earth, of an Earth-centric universe. So sorry, I misspoke earlier. 10 levels come in here, not 3 Enoch. 2 Enoch also retells the War in Heaven story. So the whole, Lucifer and his angels cast, rebel, that whole thing. It also gives ethical instruction to Enoch uh, for his for his son, if we're still ascribing to that legend. Um, which the main highlight for this one would be love all things. What's funny here is, yeah, the main ethical, moral dictation given is love all things, right? Love for all things, really. It doesn't really mention Moses' law or any of the Ten Commandments or any of that stuff. So again, we're kind of getting into the why it's also non-canonical for probably for at least a couple of reasons why. 2 Enoch also outlines the priestly succession of Enoch. So pretty much, with Enoch gone, his son was asked to come in to be part of the priesthood, and then just so on and so forth, detailing those sorts of things, right? And then we have 3 Enoch. 3 Enoch is also sometimes called the book of the palaces. Book of the palaces. It states that it's from the 2nd century, but it's most likely from the 5th century. Its author claimed to be Rabbi Ishmael, who's most likely Ishmael ben Elisha, who lived through the siege of Jerusalem. Just because of some of the references that it makes, that's most likely who, if that name, Rabbi Ishmael, is the correct name, the correct author, then that is most likely historically who it is. Originally written in Hebrew, but does have certain words and letters and such written in Greek and Latin as well. And the main point of this 3 Enoch is pretty much Enoch's ascension to heaven and his transformation into the angel Metatron, right? So there is a whole Kabbalistic, and I guess you can call it Enochian theory, that, yeah, Enoch becomes Metatron fully, right? He is said to ascend to heaven, be shown around, right, those 10 levels, is then raised to be at the hand of God, and is given the power to make anything God says into reality, into action, which is Metatron, really, though, right? Again, Dr. Justin Sledge with Esoterica has an amazing video on this that will go into a lot more detail than I got space for. So definitely check him out. Give him a like. He's awesome. He's so good. I can't stop talking about him. All right. So we talked a little bit about the celestial languages, the books of Enoch, right? The whole system's named after him. We can kind of start getting an idea how big a deal Enoch was, and which is why Dee wanted, like, can I get that knowledge there, right? But what else was in Dee's canon? What else was he working with? What was in his library, right? He was court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I, and was one of the most well-known scholars. His library, I mean, people would come from across the world, really, in Europe, to look at it, to visit his library and study there. So he clearly, he knew a thing or two, aside from just these things. So this bit, we're going to touch lightly on some other versions of magic, other traditions of magic that were starting to make waves during the Renaissance period, right? Just a synopsis, we're going to talk a little bit about Hermeticism. We're going to talk a little bit about Gnosticism. I'm going to briefly mention sorcery. And we're going to touch on Kabbalah, as well as some Neoplatonism. So we got a lot. So, but this bit, it's mostly just for context. So we hear the word Hermeticism a lot, right? Things are hermetically sealed, right? We hear this word Um, but it was really what it was, especially in the Renaissance period. It was a religious and philosophical system that kind of bridged the gap between pagan and Christian, Abrahamic, if you will, right? Um, it Whereas other systems of magic were very, referred to something just practical magic, right? This was a religious and philosophical system. This had theology. This has ideas to think about, not just things to do. Um, and it is said to have derived from a composite deity named Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes Thrice Great. Hermes Thrice Great Trismegistus um, is a composite of the Greek god Hermes, right, the Roman Mercury, with the Egyptian god Thoth, who's Thoth is his Greek name. I think I mentioned this when I covered Hermeticism in my Ceremonial Magic 101 class, but it's one of the things I think is really fascinating to know. A lot of the names that we know the Egyptian gods under are the Greek names, not even their Egyptian names, but they're Egyptian gods. Like Isis is a seer, ASR, and Thoth is Tahuti. That is spelled Dhwty for the most part. There's like a TH way of spelling it too, but the more scholarly accurate is DH. Some magical systems will use a TH like Tahuti. But yeah, so Thoth, Tahuti, you hear those two names, same dude. Both obviously were gods of wisdom and writing, messengers of the gods, and those sorts of things. And so they got conflated and were said to be one god. This particular bit is the reason why I don't buy into the idea of Odin being Mercury, who's on Hermes, who's on Thoth. Just doesn't match up in my personal opinion, but do what thou wilt with that as well. Cleopatra being Greek probably had something to do with it. We know she was Greek on her one of her parents' side. I'm trying to remember. Egypt only ever matched the paternal side, but the mother side we know nothing about. And judging by some of her features, she may have still as well been African, an Egyptian, like Black Egyptian as well. So very very Alexandrian. Just that. I'm not a big fan of the is she white or black? She was Egyptian, so probably my shade-ish. Some variation of brown. So Hermeticism, right? Came out of Hermes Trismegistus. This one maybe could be where the name stems from. So the name stemming from Greek and Egyptian, yeah, it's the Egyptian Greek cultures completely started melding. I mean, to the point where Cleopatra and Ptolemy, the Ptolemaic reigns, they were predominantly Greek in heritage, but they had completely taken on the customs of the native land and Egyptian, to the point of where they fought against Greece, right? And their continued colonization, essentially. So the world of Alexandria, where the library was, that all of us like to cry about, and all that, was just this melting point for Greek and Egyptian culture, and a lot of Middle Eastern culture would get mixed into that too. Sicily was another really good mixing point. Sicily and Alexandria, dude, those are the places I want to be if I was living in the ancient world. Amazing melting pots, respect for different cultures and traditions that were just, let's build and create and think. Freaking awesome. Get a chance, more YouTube videos. Overly Sarcastic Productions has a video on Sicily and the history of the island. They go really well into just how diverse and how tolerant and empathetic they were to different traditions, and how they really just built, rather than just be petty like the rest of the old world was doing. They just kind of were like, hey, you know shit I don't know. Do you want to teach me and I'll teach you this? They're like, yeah, let's go. Like they just wanted to learn from each other and hang out. Like Sicily and now Alexandria. The US could learn a thing from that. You know, it's fine. All right. I digress. My first teacher was a druid. This is what I get. So with Hermeticism being a religious philosophical tradition, not so much, not only just a action practical system, there's a lot of literature. There's a lot of literature there. Majority of it, and the cornerstone foundation for a lot of the Hermetic writings is referred to as the Corpus Hermeticum, which is a collection of 17 Greek writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. These 17 Greek writings were written somewhere between 100 to 300 CE, and they were translated into Latin in the 15th century by Marsilio Ficino and Lodovico Lazzarelli. I'm terrible. Mercury retrograde. That's gonna be my excuse this whole month. Yeah, they were translated into Latin in the 15th century, but probably written somewhere around 100 to 300 CE. Right. The Corpus Hermeticum is the collection you want for Hermetic writings, because it was first compiled originally by Byzantine editors, but once it was translated in the 15th century, it took off. It would really be one of the cornerstone documents for a lot of Renaissance magic in general. Like, it was everywhere. And it was really, in a modern day context, it's where you start drawing the line between, if you've seen the two words, kind of how we have, Kabbalah and Kabbalah. It's where you kind of draw the line between it's the word Hermeticism and Hermetist. When you see the word, oh my god, I can't believe I scratched out. Hermetism. Sorry, Hermetism. Again, I'm after Hermes, right? Hermetism. That is really strict definition of what Hermeticism is, and saying anything's a strict anything about Hermeticism is already a fallacy, right? Like, Hermeticism at this point has been so watered down to really mean anything from up into and including The Secret and that bag of fun stuff. Yikes. No judgment. The corporate phone being able to, working with the Hermeticum, the Corpus Hermeticum, and kind of reading from those texts, as well as the Asclepius, 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 which was another document originally written in Greek, but was lost. While the main text we do have intact was originally in Latin. These texts are really where you get like true Hermeticism, or Hermetism in this case, whereas like Hermeticism can almost be used to describe what is referred to commonly as a technical Hermetica, right? You're working, right? You use it. The technical Hermetica is, according to legend, where you get astrology, alchemy, and sacred psychology. Those are the three main teachings of technical Hermetica that Hermes Trismegistus was said to have given the world, right? Obviously, we know, modern Western astrology, tropical astrology, predates Greece and all that. Astrology, alchemy, and sacred psychology. it was most of the time generally you'll find it referred to as psychology, but it's different than what we consider psychology now. So a lot of folks you'll see sacred psychology, magical psychology, proto psychology. Essentially, what Carl Jung was trying to re-inject into psychology before Freud had him essentially kicked out of the community. That guy definitely knew what he was talking about for sure. But the technical Hermetica is where probably the most common and the most popular and the most easily accessible form of Hermeticism that you find now. This is where you also get the Prisca Theologia, or what is please don't go down the Jung route. Oh, but I personally like you went insane, but that's right. Yeah, the Prisca Theologia, which essentially translates to ancient theology. Yeah, boo, I know I'm a hoe. I like it. It's fine. Which is where the Prisca Theologia is where you get kind of like the concept of like the single unity of all religions that like theosophy would build upon. Hermeticism and Neoplatonism would kind of trade this back and forth as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this is also where this is also the realm of the Emerald Tablet, right? This is the realm of as above, so below. The Philosopher's Stone, not the Sorcerer's Stone. We don't do transphobia here, right? As above, so below is in a funny way. It's actually a paraphrase. The original statement, the original phrase that it's paraphrasing, in case you're just not familiar, it's not uncommon, but it's not also the most common. So I just repeating it for the heck of it. That which is above is like to that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above. So that's as above, so below. So we got all that, the Emerald Tablet stuff. Emerald Tablet is where you get the very controversial Kabbalion, written by the three initiates, aka William Atkins in Chicago in the 20s. That gave birth to a lot of Hermeticism would lead into The Secret. If you're not familiar with Hermeticism and you don't take the Kabbalion as Hermeticism in and of itself as like representative of the whole thing, I have personally found in my practice and my with my students that I have outside of the academy as well, that moving from a witchcraft point of view, where we're thinking very, for lack of a better term, microcosm. You know, why do we do this? Well, the seasons. Why do we that? Because the moon. Why do we that? Because the sun. We're thinking very, very microcosm, not micro as in small or bad, but just microcosm, right? In the sense that we're dealing with, you know, the materiality of this universe here now. The Kabbalion, well, yes, being a work of fiction, and it doesn't, you know, hold a lot of weight, any weight in the general Hermetic or occult communities, it could be a good introductory text for the style of thinking that will make understanding other Hermetic and occult texts easier, so long as you understand that it is written in the context of New Thought, which is a sort of think it, you believe it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps spirituality, right? New Thought was pretty much capitalism made spirituality. The Kabbalion was written in as a New Thought book written with Hermetic facade, but because of that, and because that type of American, you know, ideology is so prevalent for a lot of us here in the States, it can be a decent introduction. So do what I will with that. Whether you like it or not, that's absolutely your bag. But it can be useful for some newer folks. So I definitely, you know, do recommend in that particular bit. But that is that is the ocean skin. That is not even, you're not even in your toes yet. Haven't even dipped in your toes to Hermeticism. The other school of thought that played heavily into Renaissance magic, the world that where John Dee was coming from, was Gnosticism. Another tradition that, you know, has a very specific meaning in some contexts, and in other contexts can mean pretty much anything. Gnosticism in its original context was a heavily dualized collection of Jewish and Christian, so that's Abrahamic ideas. It focused less on sin and salvation and more on illusion, on the breaking of illusionment and the bringing forth of enlightenment. The way I like to word it, traditional Gnosticism, even just Gnosticism in its most mundane text, is more about orthopraxy versus orthodoxy, right? Orthodox, right? Follow the rules. The community sets the rules. The higher ups, you got to do what you're told, kind of thing. Walk in line. Orthopraxy is more about personal self-fulfillment, enlightenment way of doing things. So it's definitely more focused on orthopraxy. Psychology and Alchemy, Volume 12 is a better book on Hermetics. And that pains me to say, especially when people quote it as a book on alchemy. I am not familiar with that one. My litmus test for whether a book's a good book on alchemy or not is, are they going the alchemy is just nothing but spiritual turn your base soul into gold kind of thing, or is it actual like proto-chemistry? Because the idea of alchemy being the spiritual work is definitely a more newer concept. Is not how most alchemists would have worked with the system back in the day. Oh, Saint Germain. Oh, opinions. Yeah. Okay, but the I Am temples, they will never let me in, but I want to check it out. But they make me, you need to like read like 3 books just to get into an I Am temple. And because they won't let me in, I want in even more. So I'm almost tempted. I'll let y'all continue that conversation there. So the duality that Gnosticism comes into play is where you get like concepts of like, so the demiurge, right? So the demiurge is, according to Gnosticism, the God, the creator God, right? That the God of the Old Testament created this world and all of its material trappings, and is thus a negative, and materiality is negative and suffering, very much the way like something like the Buddhist and Eastern ideas see, like materiality is suffering, existence, that sort of thing. That's all bad. And so thus salvation for oneself lies rather than conforming to the church, conforming to what everyone else says is how you reach unity with God. You turn inward. It's personal enlightenment. It's personal gnosis, right? Gnosis is that key word here. It is said in some Gnostic texts that Christ was responsible for breaking the demiurge's illusions on us, and so that's we reach salvation through that. The main problem with some of these Gnostic ideas of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Testament, that God is the demiurge, the evil thing, whereas Christ is the new coming God that is going to save us from the old God. You start getting really, really easily into some anti-Semitic tropes, anti-Semitic concepts and philosophies. So you really, really want to watch yourself if you're digging into some of this stuff, because a lot of it just looks like an excuse for being anti-Semitic. So be a little careful with that if you're getting into this kind of system. But the key part of Gnosticism, especially as it plays into modern occultism too, and Enochian magic as well, is that keyword gnosis, right? It's a feminine Greek word meaning knowledge or awareness. It is essentially said that spiritual knowledge of the inherent divinity of ourselves is more important than faith and tradition of the church, the community, right? It's this is where you start getting concepts of like what the New Agers call Christ consciousness, right? It's personal gnosis. It's the idea that, like, some Gnostics believe that Christ was never an actual person. He was a concept, an idea that we can all attain to, kind of like how any person can be a Buddha. It's that sort of like concept, right? 1 second. All right, I just have to turn off the fan here. And so that way, yeah, that search for truth, your own truth, is really what what makes Gnosticism so enduring, right? It allows for UPG being unverified personal gnosis, which can be a good thing, but something you also want to be careful for too. So UPG, especially when working with systems like the Enochian system or anything that's super formulated, UPG, right? Like unverified personal gnosis. It can mean like you did a scrying into a dark pool of water that you left under the full moon and got some really amazing insights into just yourself, the world, your spiritual, the spiritual path that you're following or on. That can mean a lot for you and do a lot amazing things, great things for you. But once we start passing UPG off as the truth, that's when things start getting dicey. And so Gnosticism kind of it actively promotes UPG for each of ourselves, because if it's my truth, my personal gnosis, that means it's not your personal gnosis. So you do that work, you go look for that, and the way I see the divinity in me, I'm going to see the divinity in you, right? So Gnosticism, I think, played a good role, particularly in the Enochian stuff, because got to pretty much think of yourself as worthy of the divine messengers to be able to receive the divine message. Dee had to really think of himself at least somewhat close to worthy of Enoch at the very least, even if he was as pious as they say he was. So to continue on, I guess I'm going to touch on sorcery, because we're going to talk about sorcery in our next class when we go into goetic stuff. Sorcery is another word for goetic magic. Sorcery, though, in a broader context, essentially means summoning spirits, right? It is sometimes referred to as low magic, as opposed to ceremonial stuff like the Enochian here, which is referred to high magic. Or a more true comparison would be theurgy. If you remember us talking about theurgy in my ceremonial magic 101 class, theurgy being essentially a Western version, but not connected to at all, of bhakti yoga, right? Devotional love yoga, right? Devotion to the divine. Sorcery also really comes out of the grimoire tradition. So stuff like the Lesser and Greater Keys of Solomon, the Grimoire of Armadale, and those sorts of things. Again, actively summoning spirits. Sorcery would also sometimes get potatoed with necromancy. Even though necromancy, we tend to think of specifically summoning dead spirits, thus dead people. Sorcery, necromancy, low magic, Goetia. So along the same wavelength. While John Dee was not summoning goetic spirits per se, he was summoning spirits, and so sorcery does play a role there. Did you ever hear about the Mexico connection with the Kelly scrying mirror stone? I've heard of it as far as how they got the obsidian mirror that's like actively still in the British Museum, but I don't know how they acquired it. That is definitely that is actively on my to research list for some of our next class. Yeah, specifically Aztec. Um, Mostly, I think just the timing wise, it would have clocked out that the Aztecs were still around. Um, but at that point, sorcery is also connected to less privileged communities. Absolutely, in a modern context and in a dealing with communities who are actively decolonizing, sorcery has been often tied to voodoo, santeria, those sorts of things. Again, summoning spirits. This is not necessarily going to be a bad thing, but Europe's connotation of sorcery, necromancy, and their heavy dose of colonization and racism, yeah, um, gave way to that. But the word in and of itself generally just means summoning spirits without, and it really shouldn't have any of the negative connotations that it does. Just like it's why I don't like using high magic to refer to ceremonial magic, because it implies that other stuff is less than, and that's why I don't like referring to sorcery as low magic per se. Yeah. All right. One of the other systems of thought, philosophy, that Dee was well aware of and absolutely operated under was Neoplatonism, right? Neoplatonism, obviously, Plato, right? All those. Neoplatonism began with Sakos and Plotinus in the mid 200s AD. Topics that generally fall under and ideas that generally fall under Neoplatonism. This is a summary. This is obviously not exhaustive, because that's its own 2-hour class, 3-hour class. Topics that Neoplatonism kind of covers: emanations of the soul from the divine eternal one, the one being an ineffable, unknowable thing that can't even be said to exist or be, really. That's where you get into the idea that all religions have fragments of truth, because it's just all one divine source that we're all feeding from, right? This is where you get into the concept of the nous, Nous, Nous. The nous is a being, a thing, a concept, and none of those things. That is 100% derived from the one, but 100% entirely different as well. But it is also the aspect that we can make as humans, make contact with and connect to. Neoplatonism is also where we get the concept of the world soul, aka Jung's collective unconscious. Sounds almost Hellenistic, absolutely. Platonism, yep, definitely Hellenistic in context. But yeah, the world soul, aka Jung's collective unconsciousness, right? Something that we all tap into, that we are all connected to, that we can all grow with, and kind of learning from each other from, kind of thing, right? What I've heard some witches kind of deem as I don't know if I fully ascribe to this, but if this helps your understanding of it, it's like one of the lower levels of the astral is the collective unconscious. It's that world soul, right? It's that where we can all kind of connect and be outside of our physical realm. So Neoplatonism and some of these ideas here heavily influenced Hermeticism, and we're just all floating around the Renaissance period, when Dee and Kelly were doing these things. Thank you. So one of the last things, the last thing I'm going to mention, one of the last things I'm going to mention is Kabbalah. I'm not going to get into alchemy, mostly because when we talk about Edward Kelly, we're going to talk a lot about alchemy there. So I'm kind of saving that for that bit. Um, so Kabbalah is, like I mentioned earlier, Jewish mysticism, right? Um, it originally, so it probably started really coming up truly in 12th to 13th century Spain, is when we really start seeing it, but it was an oral tradition, right? Which means it probably existed for far longer than we ever give it credit for. We could ever give it credit for. If you're looking into Kabbalah, again, so Kabbalah with a K is going to be oh my gosh, yeah, Kabbalah with a K is going to be Jewish in origin. You won't find any tarot card references there. You might find some astrological references there. You were not going to find any Greek or Roman gods aligned on there. And you sure as hell are, true Kabbalah. You're not going to find any red bracelets. I don't know if anybody remembers that reference. Damn red bracelets. So yeah, traditional Kabbalah, right? Jewish. It would then so to keep it a linear story, right? Jewish tradition, which looking at the historical record, you don't really see Kabbalistic ideas popping out till after the after they were left Babylon or Babylonium. And so like there's a lot of theories that some of these Kabbalistic ideas are Babylonian in origin as well. And I mean, they were there for several generations. So my main concern with when you start digging into those kind of ideas of where Kabbalah really comes from is, again, are we just trying to take it from a people who's had everything taken from them? So careful with your digging. Make sure you don't double check your sources and such. But so it comes out of the Babylonian period, captivity. It's when we first start seeing inklings of Kabbalistic ideas really start taking hold in Spain and southern France. And then around 12th, 13th century is when you start seeing it kind of explode. At a certain point, you started writing things down that would eventually become books like the Zohar, which is the definitive book on Kabbalah. You can generally find a good introduction to the Zohar if you want to read excerpts from it. Daniel C. Matt's excerpts from the Zohar, or anything from Jerem Shalom is also going to be good. Jerem Shalom. This actually, you know what? I'd probably even recommend this one. The Classics of Western Spirituality. This whole set of things, this like what am I thinking? Series of books, absolutely phenomenal. This might even this one's also done by Daniel C. Matt. Absolutely wonderful stuff. And then there's also early Kabbalah. I will put all these in the bibliography for this class. Classics of Western Spirituality. You ever see those? Snag them. They kind of pretty much start getting to a point with Kabbalah where it exploded, and then it started to like within the Jewish community, and then it kind of started dying out. And the Jewish community was just getting more and more shit because stuff, whatever. Because apparently the Jewish folks and the Romani folks were just people that Europe just didn't want to stop bugging in Europe. And so a group of Spanish rabbis pretty much felt that the end of the world was nigh. And the only way to stop it was to get people practicing Kabbalah. And so they actively opened up the system taught it to Jew and Gentile, and pretty much made it an open tradition. So Kabbalah, in a sense, is not closed. Again, I am saying this as somebody who's not Jewish. I do have some Jewish ancestry. That's also my name. But certain Jewish sects will not agree with this, will actively, it is a close practice for them. And so make sure if you're digging into Kabbalah, you are very respectful of your source material. You're very respectful of the company you keep. And you're very respectful of any Jewish people that you are operating around, that you are that are part of your community. So just keep that in mind. And again, don't go asking your Jewish friend either, because I can't speak for all Mexicans. They can't speak for all, just keep those things in mind. But because of that opening of it, you start getting what is referred to as Kabbalah. Kabbalah spelled with a C instead of a K, right? Now spelled with a K. Kabbalah with a C is Christian. C, Christ, right? That stuff is pretty much almost 90% of the time going to be actively anti-Semitic and problematic, and I really don't care to spend much time talking about it. The only person who uses Kabbalah with a C that I think is not bad is the author Ophiel. But I prefer his book on astral projection than his book on Kabbalah. But yeah, so just very, very careful. The other one you'll see that's spelled with a C is, it's fairly common, is Goodwin's Kabbalistic Encyclopedia. This one's also not terribly problematic. It's more of an encyclopedia. So it can only really get so terrible when you're just listing things. But yeah, so there's that. And then there's Kabbalah with a Q. Kabbalah with a Q is actively occult. It's actively magical. It's where you start getting tarot and astrology and the different god forms. It's where you can start using, Kabbalah for like active magical practice. It's generally referred to as the Hermetic Kabbalah, or sometimes referred to as the practical Kabbalah. Whereas Kabbalah is generally sometimes referred to as the philosophical Kabbalah, the theoretical Kabbalah. So again, I'm going to heavily recommend, if you're looking for a source on Kabbalah or Kabbalah, Israel Regardie is that perfect middle point between the two. And his book, The Tree of Life, or The Middle Pillar, either of these two books, phenomenal, right? Amazing starting points. So the reason why Kabbalah plays a role here with all the Enochian stuff is, as somebody's mentioned, the Enochian angels are tied onto the paths and the different Sephiroths, the 10 emanations. It is said, Kabbalah is how you can essentially, right, transverse from the materiality of this universe into unity with God. And so there is a whole host of like 72 angels that also play a role in there, that are somewhat connected to the Enochian angels as well. But Dee's main expertise was in Kabbalah. He was a Kabbalist first and foremost, Kabbalist and astrologer first and foremost. So these were the types of systems of magic he was actively into. And he understood his astrology from a Kabbalistic standpoint. He didn't do zodiac love reading, right? Love sign for the day kind of things. It was very much through this Kabbalistic lens of the different emanations from spirituality, from like pure God energy to the world, right? To the material plane, to the material universe. And so having just a general understanding of Kabbalah will heavily assist you in your understanding of Enochian. Getting a general, I would even say elementary understanding of Kabbalah, Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, and basic ideas of sorcery, jumping into Enochian will be a lot easier than just going straight in. You can absolutely do it. You can absolutely just jump right into Enochian in the deep end. But having these background knowledge is really, really useful. It adds a lot of context for things. And in my personal opinion, I'm definitely a kind of person who I want to know the history of the what and why I'm doing something before I start doing it. It's Witchcraft 101. You gotta learn your basics before you can really do much, right? I know the chaos magicians out there are going to disagree with me, but that's why they're chaos magicians. So that's kind of why all this stuff is important. If you're coming from that kind of point of view, it's just well-rounded knowledge, well-rounded background. It's gonna make your dive into Enochian just a lot easier. But again, you don't need to know all of this. You don't need to be an expert Kabbalist, able to make planetary sigils, from your Kabbalistic color scores. Like, you don't need to be able to do all that to be able to do Enochian magic. You don't. So don't let this last 2 hours make you think you need all this to be able to do anything with Enochian. It's just a really good foundation if you need it or want it. So the last thing I'm going to close with, essentially, is we said this class was Enochian Magic 101. We've talked about Enoch, talked about some angelic languages. I didn't really spend a lot of time talking about John Dee, though, or Edward Kelly, or Medini, or any of that, really. But again, I wanted to offer this as a foundational document, as a foundational thing for those who would need it. So to touch on Dee and Kelly, so we know where we're going for our next class. All this leads to that, right? John Dee, again, like I said, was an astrologer for Queen Elizabeth I, first guy to coin the British Empire. Fun fact, as if those rest weren't also fun facts, he's also the origin of the name 007, because he was a spy for the British Crown. And Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond novels, actively cites John Dee as 007 as one of the influences for naming James Bond, giving Bond that code name 007. Also was 007 comes also from some of the folks who cracked the German code in World War One. So that's also that. But John Dee pops up everywhere. Ian Fleming Casino Royale is a direct reference to Dee. Not surprised there. I mean, Dr. No is a straight ripoff of Crowley. I mean, Fleming knew Crowley, was the one who actually recommended Crowley to be a British spy as well. But Fleming hated Crowley, though, so I don't know why he necessarily recommended, but he did. But yeah. I really want somebody to write a book on Ian Fleming's occult background. Like, somebody please. Grew up loving those Bond movies. They're cheesy and terrible and misogynistic. God, they're so 90s. And I haven't seen any of the new ones. They're terrible from what I recall, but they're fun for the sake of terribleness. Fun. I also like Vampire Diaries. So, like I mentioned, his big old library. But because of all this, so John Dee was the court astrologer for Queen Elizabeth I, right? He casted her chart, her and I believe her sister, and then was persecuted and was being taken to trial for doing such a thing. He ended up being let off, but that kind of essentially kick-started a string of people essentially trying to go after him. He never really, I mean, he was doing some weird stuff at a really, really not okay time to do these kind of things. I mean, we talk about we all probably know at least one person who's not out of the broom closet yet, and here he was doing this kind of stuff openly in the Queen's court, in the Renaissance. So it kind of started to wear on him a bit, and it's also what made him having trouble kind of keeping a scryer. The one he had before Kelly wasn't really doing much, wasn't really working out. One of Kelly's first scrying sessions with him, Kelly would tell him that you're a person that, you know, the person you're working with essentially is going to be arrested and this and that. Like, and a lot of people use that as a evidence that Kelly was just trying to trick Dee into, you know, bring him into under his tutelage. His library was ransacked when he was away from his home. Yep. Yeah, it was. Came back to it pretty much gone. Check out John Pearson's book on Fleming. All right, I definitely will. Thank you. And Kelly, we don't really even have that much detail on him pre-John Dee in general, right? We know that his father had an apothecary where that's where Kelly learned how a lot about herbs and how to work with them and their properties. That's where he would get into alchemy. He was first and foremost an alchemist. Like I mentioned, he was also a counterfeiter. He was arrested at least once on forgery. And he was always, his main point for doing all of this was being able to create the Philosopher's Stone and be able to turn base metals to gold, right? That was his main end goal throughout all of this. The fact that when we know the history knows him as Edward Kelly, but his school records and when he probably first introduced himself to Dee was as Edward Talbot, Talbot, Talbot. It says that he maybe attended Oxford, like there's somebody under that name, but he never actually finished anything. Never actually got any sort of accreditation at all. And so we know he knew Latin, which, I mean, being able to do that in of itself, even in the Renaissance period, was, you know, not common. We don't know much about him, but because of the secrecy, because of those arrests, because of all that, and the name changes and everything, a lot of folks have a lot of reason to be weary about it. But regardless, according to the angels, Kelly and Dee were two sides of the same coin. They needed each other to be able to do this work. It wasn't going to work without one of them. And they had to do this together. They had to work together. And their goals, while different, again, Dee wanting to learn the knowledge of the angels, because he just wanted to know everything he possibly could under the heaven and earth. And Kelly just wanted cash, that the two would end up actually helping each other accomplish those said goals if they finished and did the other rituals as such. Do I know how Dee and Kelly met? There is some debate on that, but I've heard one story which was Dee was needing some materials, and Kelly, being the alchemist and an apothecary, an apothecary was there to supply. They met, and boom. I've heard another one that Kelly went to Dee himself to visit his library and pretty much begged for him to be like under his tutelage. Those are the two stories I've heard. But yeah, those are why the two wanted the experiments. That's why those two kept going for these two things. And that's kind of where we're going to leave off, because that's where we're going now ourselves. The next class I'm going is going to be, again, more of a focus on, for lack of a better term, the mundane stuff. I want to look and examine the lives of Dee and Kelly. I want to look at like Elizabeth I, because he was the magus of the royal court. Yeah, cool. But yeah, that's we're gonna look at their lives next. So I see one person doesn't need to leave. I think we went over by I was told 2 hours. So I think we went over by about 13 minutes. So my apologies there. But I look forward to seeing y'all next time for our classes. My next class is going to be on the 18th on Goetic Magic. And then October, I need to schedule them, but my two classes are going to be on La Santa Muerte, the Mexican Saint Death, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there about her. So I like to set the record straight. And then the pre-Hispanic origins of Dia de los Muertos, the Dia de Muertos, right? Because it's not a Catholic holiday, despite what you think, what you may think. And we're actually technically, just a little teaser there, we're technically actually in the time period where the original pre-colonized holiday that would become Dia de Muertos was actually celebrated right now. So I'm excited. We're going to be talking about a lot of that. Those two are going to be next month in October. With Dia de Muertos coming up. So thank you so much. I look forward to being able to talk to you guys. Y'all need me. I'm in the groups. I also now have access to the Divination Academy page. So if you need me, find me on there. Otherwise, if you know me, shoot me a direct message. Thank you all so much for letting me just info dump on y'all for 2 hours and 15 minutes. Really appreciate that. Great background setup. Thank you. I will also take this time. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask? All right. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you all. I will see y'all on the 18th. I'm gonna stop recording, turn off my camera for a second, but if you do need me, I will be here.